Summer vacation was something we always used to look forward to when we were kids. You finally didn't have to go to school, put up with the teachers for at least 12 weeks when we were kids. When I was a kid anyways. I don't know how it is now. Every so often, during the course of the week, we'd like to go down and play in the field. A group of us would get together and go play. It never failed. There would always be one person in the group that would start whining. Apparently, for whatever reason, we weren't playing the game that he wanted to play. He'd start whining, bitching, pissing, moaning. I don't want to play this. Okay, well, we wanted to play. We were kids. He'd just continue whining. Eventually, start walking off. I'm going home. Okay, you're welcome to play if you want to play, but no. Poor Billy would go walking off into the distance. The funny thing was, Billy wouldn't go home. He would be far enough away to where we could still see him. He'd be around a tree, kicking stones, sulking, pouting, because we weren't paying any attention to him. But he was invited to play with us, yet he wanted to attract attention onto him. Well, okay, that's up to him. If he wants to leave, he wants to leave. Well, we started playing. Every so often we'd look up and Billy was still there. He didn't go home, but he's still sitting there pouting, kicking, and we'd just continue playing. We'd wave him every so often to come over, but he wouldn't come over. And so we'd just keep on playing. Apparently, during the course while we were playing, Billy must have realized that we weren't paying any attention to him. So instead of going home, what would he do? He'd kind of saunter on a little closer, and a little closer. And finally, he's right there sulking while we're playing. Couldn't understand why he wouldn't jump in and stop playing, but he just wanted to sit there and sulk. Finally, we'd stop. Billy, what's the problem? And Billy would lay into us. We were all idiots. We were this, that, and the other thing, and he'd finally storm off. Needless to say, we didn't ask Billy to come along with us anymore. It was about the late 90s, early 2000s. I had a co-worker, hard worker, never missed a day of work. He needed a new place to live, and he eventually moved in next door to me. So after work, we'd hang in the driveway, have a few beers, laughing, blah, 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 blah. I noticed a scenario. As we were drinking and the night would go on, his mood would get very depressing. He obviously wasn't a happy person. He knew me from work, so I had a pretty happy life. Nothing extravagant, normal life. I was pretty outgoing at that time. And he started drawing me into his problems. We all have them. And he had horrible social skills. So every so often he'd go on and on. Now, nothing wrong with that. Every so often we all need an ear to chew on with our personal problems. But it got to be quite redundant. It was almost every day. He'd loop me in. And he basically was a lonely guy. Now, where I was outgoing, I was rarely home. I'd go out on my own and just do whatever. If he wasn't working, or if he wasn't out hanging in the driveway with me, he was locked in his house. No one would come by to see him, and he wouldn't go anywhere. He was a very depressed person. There was one night he fessed up as to what the problem was. Now, like I said, this was either the late 90s or early 2000s. I really can't remember. He said, I'm having a problem. I'm not quite over my divorce. Okay, I didn't realize he was married. And I says, yeah, I went through a bad divorce myself. And he says, yeah, well, you seem to have gotten over it. I'm like, well, yeah. And then he asked, well, when did you get divorced? And I'm like, oh, God, I had to think about it. 1989. And he goes, that's when I was divorced. I says, that was over 10 years ago. Yeah. Well, he'd go on about his wife, this, that, and the other thing. The one thing I did find out, he did lead a sheltered existence. He didn't have a father figure, and his house was dominated by his mother and I guess his sisters. So he led a very sheltered life. My guess was he really never had the opportunity to grow up. Well, months goes by, a year goes by, and he finally says something to me. He says, you go out all the time. You never invite me along. And I'm like, well, sorry, I never thought to. Well, I figured I would start inviting him along. Maybe that's what he needs. I figured maybe you just need to get out of the house. The funny thing was there were people that reached out to him and knew that he had issues. He was a nice enough guy, but he would never open up. He chose to open up to me, and I think the problem was I kind of sugarcoated things. I would tell him things he needed to hear, but I would sugarcoat them to the point where they really weren't sinking in. So I told him a group of us are going out to a club if you want to come along. And, well, I don't know. And I'm like, you told me that I never invite you out anywhere. You're not part of any group. You have no friends. So he says, okay. Like it was a big effort to go out. As I found, it was a big mistake to invite him along. Unfortunately, he's around a group of people trying to talk to him, but he's just sitting there, holding his beer, with a sulking face. Every so often somebody would try to lure him into the conversation, but he had nothing to say, he had nothing to add. I don't know if he was afraid to socialize or what the problem was. Well, the group started filtering off around the club and talking to people, and he's still sitting at the bar, and hey, I'll be right back. I'm going to go see if I can find a table. Okay. One of the girls in the group was still sitting at the bar with him. Didn't think anything of it. I probably should have been thinking ahead. And as I'm talking to people, I look back, and he's sitting there talking to her, yeah. And he's sitting there with that look on his face, that depressed, unhappy look. I'm guessing he was giving her a sob story, and the look on her face was, oh God, God, kill me now. Get me out of here, God. Get him away from me. I figured I'd better go back and rescue her. So I go back to the table, and I said, hey guys, I got us a table. I went back to the bar. I got us a table over here in the corner. Well, she said, okay, great. She runs to the table. Well, he gives me this dirty look. What are you doing? I said, what do you mean? You just interrupted me while I was talking to her. And I'm like, Ken, in all honesty, if she wanted to talk to you that bad, she wouldn't have run to the table. Well, he was upset. And I says, I got a table. Are you coming over? He's like, no. Well, I says, okay, you can come over. There's plenty of room. I went back to the table. And I looked up. While we were, during the course of the night, we're sitting there socializing, having a good old time, getting up, dancing, this whole bit. Every so often I'd look over, and there he was, sulking, within view of us, in hopes that we would all go back and sit with him again. Unfortunately, he wanted to dominate the night, but didn't know how to open up. So how can you converse with somebody that's not talking, that's really not saying anything? As it was, I didn't invite him along again. I figured, okay, you've got some issues, and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, I continued talking to him after work and stuff, and I kind of find out that, and this is something I didn't realize, you had to agree with everything he said. Now, we used to talk about movies a lot, whether they be old movies or movies that just came out, and we'd laugh about it. And one day he says, yeah, I like The Godfather. And I'm like, yeah, I saw that movie. I really wasn't a fan. And he gives me this look. What? And I says, yeah, I saw The Godfather. I wasn't a big fan of it. It's nothing I'd go see again. And he says to me, he's like, that was an educational experience. And I'm like, Ken, it was a fucking movie. And I didn't like it. And he looks at me and he goes, well, I'm going to go inside. You do that. Well, he storms off and he goes home. And he was literally upset because I told him I didn't like The Godfather. I guess I have to like what he liked. Well, I just said, okay, fine. He'll get over it. I jumped into the truck and went out for the night. Next day, I'm out in the yard, and he comes over. And he goes, are you still upset? And I'm like, about what? well, about yesterday. I'm like, and I had completely forgotten about it. No, I'm not. He goes, well, I noticed you went out. And I'm like, yeah, I had some things I wanted to do. Oh, well, I thought that would have ruined your night about the words we had yesterday. And I'm like, they weren't words. You got upset over nothing. I didn't like a movie. You got upset about it. And I says, well, I just thought highly of that movie. And I'm like, and I didn't. And I noticed the conversations were getting more and more and more like this. And what it come down to, he wanted to have a girlfriend. And sugarcoating things doesn't work because they don't hear it. He wanted the truth of what his problem was. And he would always ask, well, what's wrong? Why can't I get a girlfriend? Why doesn't anyone want to be around me? And I would go light and easy because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was quite fragile. And I'm like, well, give it some time. You just got to learn to socialize a little bit. And frankly, I didn't want to tell him that girls don't want to be around you because you're a downer. You drag people down. And I didn't know how to tell him this. I probably should have just come out and tell him, which I eventually did. Made the mistake of introducing him to some girls. Same scenario. They would run off and never come back. And I'm like, you really got to lighten up. You got to get off your problems. You got to get off your ex-wife. Nobody wants to hear about your ex-wife. And he brought up my divorce. And I'm like, yeah, and you don't want to know how many times I've even mentioned her in the last 10 years? Hell, I can't even remember her name. And I says, nobody wants to hear about your ex-wife. Nobody wants to hear about your problems. Not all the time. That is reserved for good friends, over time, and even then, not all the time. You drag people down. And he says, I drag you down? I'm like, well, yeah, there are times you do. Well, he'd storm off again. He knew he had a drinking problem, admitted he had to stop, but whether or not he ever did, I don't know. And it got really bad. I mean, it was when I started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, I think that was in 2006, he all of a sudden wanted no part of me. Which, okay, fine. I was very busy at that time. I didn't have time to play. It was during that time he finally came up to me and he says, I want to know the truth. I want to know what my problem is. And he says, for the last few years, I think I have been telling you what your problem is. You just have not been listening. And anything I've told you that you didn't like, you just totally disagreed with. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. The fact was, his problem was he lived a sheltered life. His mother coddled to him. And while his mother coddled to him, he felt that the entire world should. And that was Billy's problem. And many, many, many people like that. They think you should sugarcoat everything. They're very one-sided. Billy was one-sided. Ken was one-sided. Oh, poor baby. And the real world doesn't work that way. Try using that in the workplace and see where that gets you. And he finally asked me, I want to know the truth. I want to know what you think. Well, I let him have it. I made it short and sweet to the point, and I told him. And when I told him, he looks down. Wow, you really hurt my feelings. And he turned around and walked away. Didn't talk to him much more after that. And he eventually vanished. Nobody knows where he went to. Whether or not he ever took to heart what I told him, I don't know. I don't know whatever came of him. I don't know if he ever quit his drinking. I don't know if he ever learned to socialize. There's one YouTuber I see so many similarities to. You try to sugarcoat things, he doesn't hear it. And unfortunately, what he's trying to do is draw people in with the poor me, the poor me. And unfortunately, if you don't agree with him, you're a hater. You're evil. He called one couple satanic. And frankly, I'm looking at a person who's brags about being a Jehovah's Witness his entire life. So it's obviously, yes, you did live a sheltered life. You never learned how society works. You really don't know how to deal with people. They generally all have one thing in common. Physically, they're really no physical threat. And most of them are not educated enough to mince words. That I've noticed on many, many, many occasions. The only thing I can think to say to him is the same thing I told to Ken 8 or 9 years back. It's time to pull your big boy pants on. Get off the tit, grow some stones, and become a man.